Welcome back. I'm Sandy LaBelle, and this is the third of the three-part series from Teaching Smarter on how we can have students cooperatively on task within seconds of the class start time. In the first video, we talked about how to create that before class starts environment so students can make a transition from all the activity in the hallway to the learning environment of our classrooms. The second video focused on how we can have a particular activity at the start of every class day so that we as teachers can have 3 to 5 minutes to do our administrivia, and students will have an activity that they will cooperatively begin as soon as class time starts so that they can have an opportunity where if I try, I know I will be successful. Now you may have had some questions as you watched the first two videos, and that's what this third video is all about. The questions and concerns that I've received from other teachers as I make presentations at state and national conferences, or as I create seminars for individual schools and school districts during their workshop days. Again, I'm Sandy LaBelle. This is Teaching Smarter, and the goals of Teaching Smarter are to have more responsible students, fewer behavior problems, and less stress and fatigue for you. The video information that I've shared in these videos comes from the first book of the two-part series of Teaching Smarter, and I am the speaker, the author, and the creator for the two Teaching Smarter books. In this third video, I'm going to share 10 of the most frequently asked questions and the answers that I provide. Let's begin. What should I do about an absent student's missed early work? This question comes up almost every time I make a presentation, and it really depends a lot on the philosophies of your school and your school district. What I do is I offer students a choice, and it's always great if we can offer them a choice. I say to them, in my particular school I was working in, it's a policy that we cannot give students a 0 if they're absent. We have to allow them a chance to make up the work. So you have a choice. You can write the word absent and give yourself 3 points, or you can copy the question and write the answer and probably get 5 points. Either way, just write absent on your paper and make your choice, and then I'll know whether to give 3 points or 5 points for your answer. How do you handle students who turn in their early work late? Once you get going in this process, you'll have very few late students. But one teacher who was teaching in a middle school said she had one class where it was pretty chronic that 3 or 4 students came in late. So what she did was she used that respectful reminder for the class countdown. She used that same technique to say 30 more seconds till early work is due, 20, 10, and when it was time for early work to be turned in, she grabbed the stack of papers that were in the turn-in spot and stapled them together. Could you still turn your early work in for points? Yes. Could you still make 5 points if you weren't in the stapled stack? No. And very quickly, that extinguished her tardiness problem, because they all want to get that perfect score. What about the student who always asks a neighbor for the early work answer? Now, I had a student named Eric, and he came in right across the threshold every day when the bell rang, and scooted into his chair, quickly copied the question down, and leaned over to the girl next to him and asked her for the answer. Now, one day, she got really irritated, and she looked at me and she said, "Mrs. LaBelle, Eric comes in late every day and wants me to give him the answer to the question." And I looked her directly in the eyes, and I said, "Well, give him the wrong answer." The class was in awe. Eric was in awe. And you know what Eric said? "She can't do that. That's cheating." One teacher asked me, "Why can't I just grade early work once a week?" And then that question kept coming up in other presentations. The purpose of the early work is to have a positive pump to start every day. So early work really does need to be graded every day. That's how it moves so smoothly through, because the students are anxious to get those 5 points every day. And it helps that transition from the hubbub of the hallway to the learning environment of your classroom, because they know they have to come in and there will be a paper to pick up before class starts every day. So it's really important that you do grade the early work every day. One teacher asked me, "I currently have students journaling as the first activity of the class, so why can't I use that as early work?" And my response to that was, journaling would be an excellent first activity of the class after early work. because early work needs to be something that's a question related to something we did the time before or something we're going to do in that class. So students view it very differently from a journal. So if you're journaling, having students journal, by all means continue doing that, but it's not early work. What about a school policy that says we can't lay out graded papers where other students can see the scores? This is becoming more and more prevalent in schools. So what you can do is ask the students to do one of two things. They can write their name on the back, and students recognize their own handwriting just fine. Or they can use a symbol, because you don't record the scores until the cover sheet's put on top. So students could collect their papers by symbol. All you're doing is grading them and putting them back in the back of the room for people to pick up. So one of those two things has worked really well for me. What if I have to change rooms during the day? Many of us have to hop from room to room in order to do our classes. And there are suggestions in book 1 for how you can smoothly do that so you don't go crazy trying to remember what you're supposed to take to each class. But for the early work, I told the students, if I arrive late to where you're already by the door but you weren't able to go in because it was locked, or I wasn't there to have the papers out, I will give you an extra 2 minutes after class starts to get your papers and get ready for the early work. And since the teacher begins the class and ends the class, not the bell is my signal, then I would make the decision to give them the 2 minutes. They just want to know for sure that they're going to get a chance to get their 5 points. What can I do if my principal requires I be in the hallway during between class breaks? Lots of principals are going to this technique to try and keep the mayhem down in the hallways, and it does cause a problem for us. But if you have your question ready to go, the students know that even if you're outside dealing with something, they can just turn on the overhead or whatever projection technique you have and start the early work without you. I want to share a story I got by email that I thought was really interesting. I got an email, and the title of the email was, "I was toast." And that kind of got me wondering, what's this about? Here's what it said. Because I knew I was going to be evaluated by my principal first thing in the morning, I spent a great deal of time at home that night perfecting my lesson plans. When I arrived at school the next day, I was shocked to find out, you guessed it, I forgot my plans. Frantically, I recreated the lesson plans. I was in the final process of making the worksheet copies for students when, you know what happens when you're in a hurry with the copy machine? That's right. The machine jammed. I got it going again just as the bell rang. I thought, I'm toast. The principal's in my room, class has started, and I'm not there. I could just imagine the chaos that awaited me. Running into the room, I anxiously turned the doorknob and gasped at what I saw. One of the students had turned on the projector for early work. All the students were at their seats quietly working. The principal was at the back of the room and had an expression of disbelief. I got the best evaluation ever. This would never have happened without my Teaching Smarter books and the great ideas. Thanks so much, Dennis Swender, Jr., Illinois high school teacher. So once the students know this routine, they're going to do it without you there. It's that incredibly effective. So give it about 10 to 15 days before it becomes a habit, but it will become a habit and you don't even have to be there. How do I use early work in a mostly lab-based class? This question refers to classrooms where students don't necessarily come in and sit down at a desk, but rather they proceed directly to a continuing lab project. I want to share another idea from a research titled The Hawthorne Effect. I'm going to just summarize the Harvard Business School research here. There's a lot more details on this study in my second Teaching Smarter book on page 129. Many years ago, some Harvard professors decided to explore how lighting levels affected worker productivity. Light levels were increased incrementally in a shop environment, and after each change, they sent researchers with clipboards to get feedback from workers. Every time when the light level was increased, there was a corresponding increase in worker productivity and job satisfaction, as expected. Then the lights were incrementally decreased. However, the expected decrease in worker output and satisfaction did not happen. In fact, the productivity and recorded worker satisfaction continued to increase. How could this be? Well, it turns out the research really demonstrated how powerful it is to ask workers about how they feel about the work they're doing. What mattered was that real people were coming around with real clipboards and recording the workers' opinions on the paper. People wanted to know their work was being monitored and their opinions were being recorded and valued. Here's another idea from the business world. People do not necessarily value what we expect, but they almost always value what we inspect. So here's how one teacher combined all these ideas in his lab-based class. He set the early work expectation the first few days with questions on safety procedures or project due dates. Then he told students that for the rest of the project, students would get their early work from their regular collection spot, write their goals for that day's 2-hour class. Then they had to find the teacher, and he would put the paper on his clipboard. Then he went around with his clipboard, found each student, and asked them, "How's it coming?" Then he put a 5 on their paper. The students then picked up their early work the next day at the consistent pickup spot before class started and put their new goal for the next day. What this teacher did was combine the positive pump of early work with the power of predictability, the Hawthorne effect, and the business conclusion that people value what we inspect, not necessarily what we expect. Brilliant! We hope you've enjoyed these 3 Teaching Smarter videos and found the specific tips and techniques helpful. The underlying philosophy of these 3 videos was to have students cooperatively on task within seconds of the class start time, to provide a reason for why they should come to class a little bit early, and to give them a positive pump to start your class every day. Remember that 17-year-old from the second video, the one who had never gotten 3 perfect scores in a row? Early work can do that for your young people. It's also a stress reduction activity so that every day you and your students can start every class calmly. Because I've been a teacher for over 30 years, I know what it's like to close the door and be alone with over 30 students. I also know what it's like to lose yourself as you try harder and harder to provide the best quality education you can for our students. It's become my life goal to help teachers provide a quality education for their students with less stress and fatigue for them. I created Teaching Smarter to provide over 100 tried and true ideas that I know work in the classroom. The focus is on how we can better handle paperwork and have more efficient classroom management. I want you to start where I ended. I want to see continuous quality improvement in our classroom management and not the continuous reinvention that I see so much of. We need you to stay. You may be the single, most consistent, positive adult in this young person's life. Our young people today have a lot of challenges. America needs you to stay. Once again, you may be the single, most consistent, positive adult in this young person's life. I want you to be kind to yourself. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate an email from you with your reaction to these 3 videos. We're going to share the contact information in just a few seconds. The same contact information can also be used if you'd like to buy a book or arrange for a presentation. I wish you the best. Perhaps someday we'll meet in person. Goodbye for now and enjoy the music.